26. Sine and Miranda slipped silently through the tall grass they had earlier been the field of battle. The two Tatate guides, one ahead, one behind, moved more boldly. They were, after all, indigenous to the area, and their presence would excite little notice. The two Dest members were a different matter. Even though they were not in uniform, their equipment would attract immediate comment. They could have worn electronic suppression suits, but that would have been too obvious to any observer. Takuda had made the decision, based on the desires of the three patrols themselves, that they should not wear the suits. The infrared suppression suits were also abandoned for this mission. Each of the patrols was to enter one of the three enclaves, make contact with the indigenous population, and determine the possible status of the mercenaries. To do that, they would have to be as inconspicuous as possible. The Tatate had helped describe what the Enclave humans wore, and the patrols had agreed to go unarmored and virtually unarmed. There was no use carrying heavy weapons. If they were discovered, they wouldn't have enough firepower to fight their way out. Stealth and blending were their only chances of survival. Far to the north, Arsenault and Busteau were making their way toward Osio. In the center, Knight and Holland would attempt to penetrate the religious enclave of the Amatukaze. Ariaki Sine and Johann Miranda had been assigned the southern enclave, the merchant society of the Usagumo. In full darkness, they had slipped away from the base camp to begin their penetration. The patrols would take 3 nights and 2 days to accomplish their missions. That was why the Tatate had been assigned as guides. Not only would they be able to aid the patrols on the routes to and from the enclaves, but they would also be able to contact their brethren who lived in the cities. Deka and Topi had volunteered to accompany Sine and Miranda. They had previously acted as bearers for the heavy weapons section, and the four had developed an interesting rapport. The two Tatate looked on their human counterparts with deep respect and almost love. The two humans reciprocated with affection for their almost pets. Most communications consisted of hand signals accompanied by chirps on the part of the Tatate and single-syllable words by the humans. The walls of Usagumo loomed above them in the darkness. They had covered slightly more than 6 kilometers in the trip from the camp to the enclaves, and the patrol had encountered no signs of activity. Even the walls revealed few signs of life. The patrol remained in the darkness while Topi scouted ahead. Presently she returned, and with chirps and hand signals gave Sine the information that this section of the wall had but a single guard, and he was asleep. The outer glacis and covered way were unguarded and showed few signs of recent occupation. The counterscarp and escarp of the dry moat were equally unattended. It was an easy climb up the crumbling slope to the rampart and the wall walk below. The 4 members dropped silently down inside the rampart and made their way to the access ramp. In a few moments, they had the defenses and the sleeping guard behind, and had entered the twisting byways of the enclave. The first part of the mission was complete. The streets were unlike anything Sine or Miranda had ever seen. Even in the poor sections of the city of the Draconis Combine, a sense of order prevailed. This was different. The avenues were narrow and twisting, blind alleys leading nowhere, and dirty. Piles of refuse were everywhere, many of them housing life of their own. Most of it was the rodent or lower animal type, but occasionally there was a clan of Tatate. There were even humans sleeping, or perhaps dead, lying beside the darkened buildings. The patrol and its Tatate guides moved through the area as quickly as possible. Ahead, the glare of lights drew them onward. Deka led the procession, for he knew where he was going in the labyrinthine maze. He had been in the city once before, but, like all Tatate, one time in an area was enough. In addition, He knew someone in the city and was sure they could use that individual's home as a safe house. Deka held up an arm to stop the patrol. Ahead was a brilliant glare of light and the rumbling clamor of activity. Sine crept forward to see the street ablaze with light and packed with humans busily going to and fro. The fact that it was well after midnight did not seem to matter at all. Sine scrutinized the people she saw, prosperous business types at play. They wore rich furs and spectacular colors, but there was something strange about their clothing. Sine studied them, comparing them mentally with others she had seen in the cities of the Combine. They were different, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She drifted back into the shadows and to the rest of the patrol. An hour later, the patrol was safe in the home of Piquete. The Tatate was aged, so obviously old that even Sine and Miranda could see it. He hobbled around his little domicile with the strained pain of those for whom life had not been easy. Piquete had been a house servant to the humans for more than 100 years, a valued retainer who had filled the position of part pet, part confidant, part servant. He was accepted among the Usagumo as a kind of fixture, seen when he was wanted, and unseen at other times. Piquete knew the Usagumo enclaves as well as Deka and Topi knew their forest. His knowledge came from more than just having been there before, and it was of more than the physical structure. He understood the dynamics of the city, its personalities, its hurts, and its dreams. There were people within the enclave who were willing followers, and there were those who felt a deep unease of how life treated them. It wasn't only those who lacked the wealth, so openly displayed, who were ready for change. They certainly were, but some of those at or near the top of the food chain also believed there should be a better way. It was to those people that Piquete would introduce the patrol. Ariaki Sine was worried at first. The plan was for the patrols to stay one night at the residence of a Tatate and then move on. Dressed in appropriate clothing to some public hostelry. They were to watch and listen. Direct contact was not part of the plan, had not even been contemplated as part of the plan. But Piquete was enthusiastic. He and the two guides had talked through the entire night, their conversation becoming excited at times and at times conspiratorial. When Piquete woke Sine and Miranda the next morning, he had everything worked out. The patrol would move to the Polygon Falcon, a small but well-respected ryokan adjoining the main market area that Sine had seen the night before. Once ensconced in the area, Piquete would bring members of the Usagumo to meet the two humans. He had made a list of possible contacts, dividing them into a must list, a should list, and a could list. At the top of the must list was the name of Hama Shirayuki, the chief administrator of Usagumo. The name meant nothing to Sine, but the position made her heart beat slightly faster. Here was a prize for which she would risk everything. If she could bring his support back to Takuda, then the Usagumo might be willing to follow the dream of a better world. The fact that it was even on the list made the Usagumo a best bet. She and Miranda discussed the possibilities later that day as they settled into their room. The process of checking in had gone much better than Sine could have hoped. Piquete knew the Tatate at the desk, and so they'd encountered little difficulty obtaining a room. The only other person about was a single human sitting in the corner of the front parlor reading a well-worn broadside. The man was surrounded by the scattered crumbs of tea cakes. The paper had rattled slightly and then resumed its crumpled shape. Except for that, they had encountered no one who might take notice of their presence. Late that night, there came a soft knock on the door. Sine and Miranda swept the remains of their meal into the armoire and prepared to meet their seventh guest of the day. The residents of the Usagumo had come calling, one at a time, throughout the hours of the early afternoon and into the evening. The two desk members had no idea how many more they would have to meet, but to have one appear this late meant he must be important. The room cleaned for their guest, Miranda opened the door to a tall, distinguished, well-dressed elderly man. They exchanged bows, and Homa Sirayuki stepped into the small room with the air of a man accustomed to being honored. He turned to Miranda.
"I am Hitman Sirayuki," he said with another bow. "You are the emissary of the other force."
Miranda closed the door and indicated Ariaki Sane, who was seated at the small desk against the opposite wall.
"I am one of them, but the person in charge here is my Gunso, Ariake Sane."
"In my world,"
said Sirayuki with a slight raising of the lip,
"we do not often find men who are willing to follow the command of a female."
Miranda saw Sane stiffen slightly. She made as if to speak, but Miranda gestured with his hand, holding her in place.
"In my world," he said with a deep bow, "we have managed to overcome that archaic prejudice."
The words came out with such smoothness that their thrust was almost unnoticed. The Johto Hai indicated a chair near Sane.
"Therefore, she will do all the speaking for us."
Other interviews had been shared between the two soldiers, but Miranda wanted to make sure that Sirayuki would feel as nervous as possible. One of the keys to a successful interview was to make the interviewee uncomfortable. Miranda felt he had succeeded. Sirayuki settled himself into the indicated chair, straightened the skirts of his flowing gown, and smiled unctuously at Sane.
"I have come to hear what you have to offer. I have already spoken with the other partnership, and we know what they can deliver. We were treated to a short demonstration yesterday, and another one today. They have been unwilling to commit their entire force, and that is understandable. But you will have to offer a great deal more in order to be within the bidding."
Sirayuki had been in negotiations before and knew all the tricks. When uncomfortable, attack. Direct negotiations were not within the parameters established for Sane. She and Miranda were to observe and be prepared to make recommendations. She began to feel the danger of the situation.
"There are many things my Lord Takuda can offer you and the Usugumo," she said smoothly.
Elevating Takuda from a mere shosa to that of nobility had been easy. It just seemed to flow.
"But Lord Takuda is not used to dealing with mere shonin. He would prefer to deal with a true samurai."
When in doubt, attack. The comment made Sirayuki flinch. Sane saw it, and knew. The hetman seemed to shrink perceptibly. He rubbed his hands to erase the film of perspiration that appeared unbidden.